Hey, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. I wanted to start with the Gospel of Luke. It's one of my favorite stories. Actually, it's one of my favorite stories in the Gospels, and certainly my favorite of the Holy Family. It's in Luke chapter 2. Each year, Jesus's parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to festival custom. After they had completed its days as they were returning, the boy Jesus remained behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Thinking that he was in the caravan, they journeyed for a day and looked for him among their relatives and acquaintances. But not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. And after 3 days, they found him in the temple. So I have 7 kids, and there's nothing worse than losing a child. Even temporarily. I think if you have a lot of kids, you just have numerous stories of children, not being with you. I remember one time we were driving up to New Hampshire, I think, and we were just at a rest stop and piling the kids in the car. And of course, just as we're getting on the highway, one of the kids says, "Where's John?" It's like, oh crap. And it's one of those like 2 miles until you can turn around and come back. One of the scariest ones was when I was at a movie theater in a different state with my family, and we all left. We all got out of the movies, and I took the boys to the bathroom, and my daughter took the girls to the candy counter. But I had my third oldest son's name is Bobby. He was probably about 7 at the time. And I thought Bobby was with her, and she thought Bobby was with me. But I came out of the bathroom, and I saw she didn't have Bobby, and I didn't have Bobby. And we're like, oh, okay, I'm sure he's around here somewhere. And he wasn't in the lobby. We went back in the theater. He wasn't there. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. It felt like an eternity. And finally, a parent brings Bobby in from the front. I guess he had walked up in the darkness, and he followed some family out. They have the doors in the back of the theater that closes without doorknobs on it, like the one that Jesus knocks on to get into your heart. So he was just out there in the parking lot, just crying, the poor kid. Some adult found him, brought him up front. And so, I mean, that's the terror of losing a child for 10 or 15 minutes. Losing a child for 3 days, I can't even imagine. And just to soften the blow a little bit, so you don't think that Mary and Joseph were delinquent parents, one of the customs when they would pilgrimage down to Jerusalem is the men would walk in one group and the women and children would walk in another group. Jesus was 12. This was the time of his bar mitzvah. So he could have gone in either group. Joseph might have thought, oh, Jesus is so sweet. He's walking with the women and children. And Mary might have thought, oh, my little man, Jesus, he's doing his first walk with the adult men. It was only after a day's journey when they all camped together. They have this, I thought you had him, I thought you had him, right? And so then it takes them a whole nother day to get back. And of course, the first place they go are relatives. They're talking to family members. They were talking to the place where they stayed, all these people. I mean, they are just looking everywhere for him. And finally, they find him in the temple. And the description here is Jesus was sitting in the midst of the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astounded at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And I like that verse because it puts a human element on the Holy Family, right? Like sometimes I think we want to strip the humanity out of Mary and Joseph. Just because Mary was sinless does not mean that she wasn't human, that she didn't have a mother's heart. And sometimes I think in our desire to be pious towards our Blessed Mother, we want to just say, well, then you would never worry and you would never, be concerned and you would never suffer, right? And we know all those things not to be true. And so, her statement was, why have you done this to us? Like we've been freaking out. We've been looking for you with great, they haven't been like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. No, like she's a mom. Like moms worry about their kids, right? St. Joseph didn't say anything. Maybe he was edited out. Whatever he had to say was like, we're just not going to put that down in the gospel. And Jesus said, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he said to them. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother kept all these things in her heart, and Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. And he was obedient to them. It's interesting. This is the only story we have outside of the birth, really, of the Holy Family. And it's interesting that we get a story of Jesus as a teenager, and that the encounter is fraught with anxiety and confusion, right? Jesus was sinless. So Jesus didn't sin. But we can do inappropriate things that aren't sinful, or maybe brain dead things, or maybe the best way to describe it would be adolescent things. Jesus, what were you thinking of not telling your mom and dad that you were deciding just to stay behind and be at the temple for a bit? Of course, we often ask adolescents that question, right? What were you thinking? The answer was, I was not thinking. They just do. Yeah. And how beautiful it is that Jesus himself was an adolescent and really allowed himself to have an adolescent brain. And the Holy Family was allowed to have this very confusing adolescent moment where he's like, what? Where did you think I would be? And they're looking at him like, are you crazy? And they did not understand what he meant, right? But there's a humility to Jesus at the end of this. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. He was obedient to them. The humility of God to be obedient to Mary and Joseph, right? I have a tough time being obedient, and especially if you have somebody like a supervisor who you think, I know more than you. Why should I be obedient to you, right? Like, how much more could Jesus have said that? Like, please, But he allowed Joseph to teach him. He learned from Joseph. He learned from Mary, and it was a family of love. It was a very human family. And again, we need to not think of perfection meaning no problems, because Jesus was perfect and he suffered more than any of us. And I think we really need to humanize the Holy Family and all the beauty of what it means to be human and all the beauty of what it means to be family. Because what we have in the Holy Family is truly a model for all families. And if we put that family in a stained glass window, or if we put a lot of caveats towards it, she's the Immaculate Conception. He's the incarnate Word. He's the terror of demons, right? We could never be anything like that push. Then we don't have an image of what a family could be. Just as our Blessed Mother is the perfect image of what a woman can be, what a human person can be, so too the Holy Family becomes that image and that model of what a family can be, what a human person can be. And I share this story when I talk about youth ministry, but I want to share it again in this context of, just that thought of a Holy Family. Over my head, you see an image of Jesus and Joseph. Let me see if I can be technical and zoom in. See how well I can zoom into this thing. Da, 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 da. There you go. I have this image of Jesus and Joseph, and I absolutely love this image. And the reason I love it is because they just look so normal, right? There's Joseph, his arm around Jesus. They're smiling. Jesus looks like a regular teenage boy. This image, doesn't happen to have any, it's not an icon, so it doesn't have any halos or other things going on with it. It really looks like it could be any family, at any place. And yet that image, I think, of Jesus and Joseph, and also of our Blessed Mother, I think can lead us into a deeper understanding of the mystery of family, which looks like the most ordinary of things, and yet is the most supernaturally graced power, really, that we have in the world. The fact that we were given the family, the fact that Jesus chose to be in a family. He could have taken a pass. I think if Jesus showed up at 30, we would have all been fine with it. We just would have accepted it. I think if Jesus, found, just came out of the clouds, would be like, okay, well, you're still Jesus. That's great. And the fact that, as he became flesh, he gave dignity to humanity. And as he became obedient to his mother and father, and as he participated in the Holy Family, he gives a new and supernatural dignity to family. I wanted to start there because if we don't have a vision, if we don't have a hope for what a family can be, we can never really help families, as St. John Paul II encouraged, become what you are, right? Become what you are. Just as in Christ, we see an image and a model of holiness, that he gives us grace to be like him. We are Christians. We are in Christ. Christ dwells in us. That's the mystery hidden from ages past and now revealed. It's Christ in us, the hope of glory. So too, we see in his plan of salvation for humanity and for all of us, this beautiful role of the family that's meant to be more than just a biological entry into this world and somebody that makes sure that we get fed and dropped off at school at the right time, but something so much more. And something I would say, sadly, we've lost as a culture, particularly I'd say a Western culture, and maybe more of a Euro-Western culture, to be sure, as I know other ethnicities have a greater value, I think, on families than a lot of the white European ancestry that we see. I certainly feel that a bit in my own life. I love my family, and I'm proud of my family. But for me, it was actually going down to Juarez and building houses and being a part of that culture in Mexico, which had such a love of family. It made me rethink, do I love my family? like it was just an incredible and joyful experience of what a family could be. I don't think I ever knew that growing up personally. Again, I didn't have a bad family. My mom and dad were together. I had an older sister. My dad was mostly at work. My mom took care of things. I got plugged into 1,000 different activities. And I felt like, particularly as I got into junior high and high school, my family wasn't my primary contact anymore. I was really busy with school and activities and other things like that. And sadly, I would say for many American teenagers, that's how they feel. Like there's something that happens around that pre-adolescent time where it almost feels like a family just hands the kid off and hands it off to the school system, which gets a lot busier, activities, other things. It's a challenge. Even I would say, as I mentioned, I have 7 kids right now. I have 2 in high school and 2 in junior high. It's a fight. It's a knockdown, drag out fight to just have meals together on a quasi-regular basis. And we have to prioritize it. And we really have to work to make it happen, because even little moments like that are just essential in terms of building a family and keeping a family together. So what I wanted to specifically address in this workshop is to just try to dive a little bit more deeply into the understanding of family that was given to us by the church, but particularly by St. John Paul II. I don't know if you've read his wonderful document, Familiaris Consortio. It was after a synod on the families. It was published, I want to say 1980, early 1980s, maybe 1980 itself. And he just expresses in such beautiful language a vision of what the family is and can become in the light of Christ. The quote we promoted this with is going to be the heart of some of what I want to talk about, which is to say, he said this: "Thus, the little domestic church, like the greater church, needs to be constantly and intensely evangelized. Hence, its duty regarding permanent education in the faith. The family, like the church, ought to be a place where the gospel is transmitted and from which the gospel radiates." And he says this statement. He says, "The future of evangelization depends in great part on the church of the home." The future of evangelization depends in great part upon the church of the home. And all of us that work, particularly with young people, we see the difficulty in many Catholic families, the drop-off mentality that in some ways our own church has been guilty of encouraging. It's just part of society, that we often, want to just take kids and give them something and drop them back. So those are some of the points I want to try to address today. But that idea and that understanding that really the future of evangelization is so dependent on what we're talking about today, and are so dependent upon these families that are are, the heart of the church, the first society, the center of culture. And we have so many things in our culture and our society today that are trying to diminish the role of mothers and fathers, separate young people from any positive impact their mothers and fathers might have. And in doing all of these things, diminish the faith. In 2003, there was a study that was done about adolescence. It was called the National Study of Youth and Religion, NYSR. And a book that was published following that in 2004 by Christian Smith was called Soul Searching. And it was a look at the religious lives of American teenagers. It was one of the first studies of its kind. And it was a lot of work and apparently a lot of money. One of the reasons why it was the first study of its kind was because it's hard to interview teenagers. There's a lot of challenges that come with interviewing teenagers, because if they're under 18, you're not allowed to interview them unless the parents sign off on it. And sometimes, or depending on the state, even have to be present during the interview. And all of that makes it really difficult to conduct any kind of qualitative and quantitative interview. So many of the reports that we see today, whether it's Gallup or Pew or those other ones, they always start at 18, because you can talk to an 18-year-old without a parent's permission. But if they're a minor, you have a lot more things that you need to do. Well, thankfully, the National Study of Youth and Religion decided to try to overcome those hurdles and really talk to teenagers. And in doing so, they talked to parents. And in the book, they say that wasn't the initial idea, but it ended up bearing great fruit, because one of the big findings of this survey was that a young person is more likely than not to reflect the religious life of their family. And it's nice to have that data there, because there's times that I think there's a cultural stereotype that if your family is really holy or really religious, that naturally the kid's going to rebel against that kind of thing. But actually, no. I mean, I get that does happen from time to time, but those are the outliers. Really, generally speaking, young people reflect the religious lives of their parents. And that's a beautiful opportunity. This is exactly the kinds of things the church has said forever, that families are the first evangelized, that parents are the first catechists, and they are the most powerful and profound influence in the faith life of a child. Well, unfortunately, Catholic teenagers did not fare very well in the survey. In fact, of all the Christian teenagers, they fared the worst, and like the worst by a considerable margin. In fact, they decided to dedicate an entire chapter of that book called On Catholic Teens. They were like, what is up with the Catholic kids? Like, why are they doing so badly? I mean, they're in the same country, they're in the same communities, sometimes they're in the exact same high school. And yet the Protestant kids, now the survey said that nobody's doing well, by the way. Like, there's a general disconnect of young people and religion and what the faith is being taught. But why is it that Catholic kids are so bad, or bad wasn't the word they used? They weren't showing measures of religiosity, which were things like going to church, saying that faith was a priority in their life, understanding basic tenets of the faith. All these things Catholics just did horribly with. And they proposed a number of reasons. And the first reason they proposed was based on their general findings of young people more likely reflecting the religious lives of their parents. As they looked back at the data of Catholic parents compared to the data of the other parents, they found that Catholic parents were the worst, the least religious. And really, one of their statements was, the problem is Catholic families. Like, Catholic parents just aren't really engaged in the faith, and their kids are just following in that path. Now, if you were in youth ministry in around that time, 2004, 2005, and I know that book still has some legs on it, even though the data is a bit old. It's probably just worse today. I know they're redoing some of that data. You might have heard that, and there was a wonderful cry, we need to do more with families. We need to do more with parents, which was absolutely true. And I think in many ways, even the conversation we're having today is due in no small part to a lot of recognition that many of the issues that people who do youth ministry with are dealing with are actually more family issues than youth issues. Unfortunately, though, I think at least my experience was initially, it was almost this pendulum swing of, we don't need to do youth ministry. We need to do family ministry, and this idea that youth ministry, I heard lots of times, and you get this every few years, somebody comes out and boldly says, youth ministry doesn't work. We need to throw it away. It's not worth the investment. It's not worth the time. And sometimes they'll say, the real thing is it's their families, it's their parents. That's the real problem. There's no way we can do ministry when kids are growing up in that kind of family environment. And I think they abuse that data just a little bit too much. So let me try to put it in perspective. Yes, parents not being active were one of the main reasons the survey suggested that Catholic teens weren't active. But the other main reason they said was that the Catholic Church doesn't invest in as much in youth as Protestants do. They noted that a Catholic teenager or a Protestant teenager is twice as likely to have a full-time youth minister, youth pastor than a Catholic does, and twice as likely to have more faith-based programs than Catholics do. And then when you look at the kind of faith-based Catholic programs that we were reporting, a lot of it was confirmation prep, which I think we all know isn't really always a great faith-based, program. So even in our data, we were like, oh no, we do stuff with young people. We have confirmation, and as if that's really all a young person needs. So I think in some ways blaming the parents isn't super fair. The church is to blame. The fact that, and I still don't get this to this day. I don't understand why a Protestant is more impelled to support youth ministry than a Catholic. It actually kind of bugs the crap out of me. Like, why don't we have that sensitivity? But again, maybe it's because we're not as active. Maybe we don't take the message of Jesus Christ seriously enough. Maybe we don't have a church that's really experienced that relationship and families that have been transformed in that. But my point is this: we don't want to have a let's blame the parents attitude when it comes to ministry. I think they get a lot of blame, and I guess you can just point the finger at everybody in terms of that. Why don't they have a faith life? Well, how were they catechized? How was the faith handed on to them? It's a much bigger picture and a bigger image than I think any one of us in any ministry program could possibly deal with. And yet there is the truth of the family needs to understand its dignity and its role as the church calls it, a domestic church. How many families think of themselves as churches, as parishes, with the father as the pastor, a role of just a little church in where the faith is meant to blossom, and the parents having a first concern about helping their kids get to heaven and helping their kids know and understand the faith. That happens few and far between in all of our parishes. And I think all of us realize that on one level or another, that if I could pinpoint one real problem in the faith life of American Catholicism, I would say it's that. It's the fact that the family just doesn't realize its own dignity and isn't a place of faith formation very often, isn't a place of encouraging holiness. And some families just don't find themselves capable of that. They don't feel capable because maybe they just don't know they should be. They haven't had the faith passed on to them effectively. We can live in a pretty brutal economic environment where many times, Americans, even worldwide, Americans are known as people that work themselves to death. We have a workaholic culture where sometimes a dad and a mom are both working really hard to make ends meet, especially if they have a big family, like we're encouraged to do. And that just gives them less and less time to connect with their kids. We have a culture and a society that intentionally separates teenagers, particularly from adults. That was part of what I covered in the previous workshop. Just culturally, we institutionalize and essentially abandon teenagers to schools and to other programs. And so functionally, an adult never needs to look at a child or deal with a child unless it's their own child. And even then, you're working all the time, and you can find somebody to take care of that child while you're trying to work. You have a huge rate of divorce and separated families, which only makes life that much more complicated. You have single mothers, you have kids that are trying to be raised by their grandparents or uncles or other things. And it really is, I mean, it's something that should give us pause and have us say a prayer for how difficult it is to be a part of a family today. I think families don't deserve our condemnation. They deserve our utmost sympathy. They deserve our prayer. I know, just as somebody that worked in a parish, sometimes it can be too easy to think of family as the enemy, parents as the enemy, especially when, they're calling you and they don't want their kid to go on the confirmation retreat because there's a hockey tournament or, something going on. And sometimes I know we can have, sadly, an adversarial relationship with parents, over certain things and over certain issues. And whereas there's some parents that you'll just never please, many parents just have a very entitled attitude towards the church and what the church is supposed to do for them. And sadly, it's that ask not what the church can do for you, but what you can do for the church, right? We don't have that attitude a lot with people in parishes. I think the vision and the beauty and the sympathy that we need to have for the difficulty of parents raising kids in a post-Christian culture in a difficult economic time. The real vision is, how might we partner with parents? How might we partner with families to help pass the faith on to their young people? What can we do to help inspire the faith within families, from top to bottom? How might we go about helping families, as St. John Paul II says, become who they are. And I want to just take a break right now and just ask the question, from based on what I've said and what the church says and what the reality of the family is, how do you see that in your own parish situation? How do you see that? Does that sound accurate? What are some other elements of particularly family situations that you all deal with in Shreveport, Louisiana?
Well, I
You all thought
definitely,
you could just sit back and watch. Yeah, go ahead.
I definitely see all of those realities in our own parish. We have a small parish here in Ruston, Louisiana, not as big as a lot of the churches in Shreveport. But
Yep.
the culture is busy, busy, busy. Like you said, junior high up. It's hard to get them here after confirmation because they've got volleyball, they've got basketball, they've got this, they've got homework, they've got swim team, all the traveling, all the busyness. Um, it does present its challenges because of their busyness. And on our younger side of things, um, parents are very busy and struggling to really just sit down with them to teach them some basic prayers. And something enlightening that's happened this year due to the nature of going virtual with some families that have chosen that route, I've been able to get to know the families and talk about prayer. And I have a small child myself, so it's easy for them to relate to me and me to grow with them. So together we're saying, okay, we're very busy. We're overwhelmed. We have the best of intentions, but of course we have to read that book 20 minutes every night and do the spelling homework and cook the dinner and exercise. And,
Yeah.
we have to do all
Yeah.
of that with probably a really tiny child at home too. I have even younger children. And the reality is, when 8:30 rolls around, you're exhausted. And do you have time to also say your prayers with your child? And it's hard. But what I told them from an educator point of view is the prayers right now are rote. They're memorization of words that we're eventually trying to bring really meaning to for the child, like something in their toolbox. And so I think putting in that way helps some of the families I'm working with one on one, because they say, oh, it's not just something to check off a list, memorize this prayer. I don't have time for that. But having something in my toolbox, or have my child having something in his or her toolbox, is awesome, because when they don't have the words to say, when life gets more difficult as they grow up, they will have those prayers that we spent that sweet time with my mom or my dad with at home on those evenings, you know. So it kind of all circles back around to what's important to families.
Yeah, amen. No, that's a great insight, and I think really beautiful advice. You know, so many times I think even in married couples, just getting couples to pray with each other. We can get so caught up in this idea of a very private faith. I say my prayers to myself. And even just the spirituality of a Catholic married couple is missing in many ways. And if you don't have that, then it's really not going to overflow into the way that you raise your children. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
And I will add this thing. I've noticed recently, because we're going through first reconciliation with our younger group, that the parents seem a bit oblivious to how that works. And as far as the sacrament itself, and really, I don't think it's something they've probably done much in their life as adults. And I'm not really pointing fingers at that. I'm just saying, going back to what you stated, it's hard for a child to really cling to a faith if you do it when you're a second grader and your parents never take you ever again, because they've never seen their parent do it. It's not a practice.
Right. No, yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's how the faith gets passed on. I mean, a young kid isn't going to be able to go to reconciliation themselves. Right. like the end. Sometimes I've been, in junior high settings, and I remember one time I was there and a volunteer was giving a talk about the importance of Sunday Mass. And they said, you've got to go every Sunday, or else, it's a mortal sin. And I was like, now it's not that there's not sin involved, but like the audience they were talking to do not have cars.
Yeah.
Like have no responsibility, because they need to be taken to church. You're talking to 11 and 12-year-olds. Like it's not their fault, and yes, it's grave matter. And I get what you're trying to say, but you got to be really sensitive, because if they're coming out of a family background where they don't go to church on Sunday, where's the culpability of it? Well, it's not necessarily with that teenager, though. As they get older and as they get cars, it's good to start saying, hey, now it's you. Like now it's all you at this point. You need to be able to go. But the faith wasn't passed on, and it wasn't something that a young person saw. So much more is caught than taught. And even just the image of seeing families at prayer is just so important. It's just so very important in terms of passing on the faith to young people. But many of them, you feel bad. It's not so much you point the fingers. What's your problem, you guys? Why aren't you going to reconciliation more or doing other things? I find more and more that it's not an issue of a rejection of faith or rejection of belief, as much as they just don't know it, and they don't know what it means, to go to reconciliation and the beauty of God's mercy. And I think that's the direction we need to be taking as a church. It's the beauty of this, right? It's the beauty of the faith. It's so many Catholics see being Catholic as a series of obligations, and at one point a year giving money to the diocese. And what it really is so much more than that. But it starts with our witness. It starts with our witness. And something else I want to highlight that you said, which is really a key element of, as we get to some practical, how might we deal with this? It's about relationship. It's absolutely about relationship. It's not, we always want to jump to program. And so is there a good program that we can put on at our parish that can really reach families? I don't think so, right? I mean, yes and no. Yeah, you can do something, and the folks that show up will be blessed by it. But chances are they're already probably tracking with the faith, the kinds of people that would show up to something about, how to raise your kids Catholic, how to be holier as a family. The ones that are showing up are probably already doing pretty good, just because, well, they're showing up and they're interested in that kind of subject. The bigger question is to start asking ourselves, what can we be doing as a church, as a parish, as a faith community, as an apostolate, whatever context you're coming from, in order of starting to instill this joy of the gospel in their life? How can we connect with them? And sometimes the direct path is not the direct path, which is to say, let's just do a night on families. I have found that youth ministry has been a very powerful opportunity to engage the spiritual lives of families, as long as those in youth ministry really have that vision of not seeing a teen as an isolated person, but as a member of the family. Very much like, Mary and Joseph, when parents get teenagers, they go into crisis. Teenagers bring crisis into families. That's just a common thing. And what's the crisis about? The young person's different. They're thinking differently. They're asking questions that they never asked before. It sounds like they're challenging authority, and in some ways they absolutely are. They're testing boundaries. They're dealing with abstract thought. I mean, there's just so much going on. Psychologists say that the most radical moment of your development is 0 to 2, but the next most is 12 to 14, 13 to 15. So they're going through a radical physical, cognitive, emotional overhaul, and they don't know what's going on. And their parents certainly don't know what's going on, and I think when the church can respond in moments of crisis, because now the family's saying, help, 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 what's going on? When we can actually jump in there, that becomes a ministry. It becomes a connection. I always tried to bring parents with me to events that we did. I just, had them as chaperones. I always had like core members that were really the relational, engaged people. But whenever I did a trip, I'm like, hey, I just need some chaperones. And some of it was intentional. I just want the parents to hear what we're saying to the kids, to the young people. How can we be more transparent with that message? Because they'll show up if their kids are there. I mean, that's why high school plays try to cast every single kid, so that they have everybody show up. Like parents will show up to what their kids are doing. So how can we see that as a bridge? Marriage prep. Sadly, there's so much work that we could be doing in marriage prep. And sometimes there is just a general reluctance of couples that are coming to marriage prep to really seek holiness. But that's a level, I think, that could really be rethought in terms of passing on faith. Baptismal prep, can we go beyond the, okay, well, here's how it goes, and here's how you hold the baby, and here's the candle, and here's the godparents. And can we talk about what it means to be a Catholic parent? I don't know a lot of baptismal programs that do that. It just gets focused. Again, like same with marriage prep. We can be focused on the moment of marriage and not the bigger picture of the life of matrimony. We can get focused on that moment of baptism, but not what it means to be a parent. And again, I don't want to be naive and assume there's a high level of receptivity for that among those that come to us to baptize their children or come to get married. But I think there's maybe more than we might think, because even though those stats are pretty low about, young people and their family, there's a reverse way of looking at it, which I think is more positive, which is to say, okay, so a young person is more likely to reflect the religious life of their parent. And then you have, let's say, a youth ministry night, which is open and voluntary. There's no confirmation requirement. There's nothing going on. It's just actually a time for kids that are interested in getting to know more about the faith to get together. And maybe you don't have a big turnout. Maybe you have 10 kids, 20 kids or something like that, right? Well, there's a very high probability that all of those kids' parents are active and engaged in the faith if their young person shows up voluntarily to something that is faith-based. And I would say that is the group to start with. We have a tendency that we want to, get everybody, but I think, we should be starting with what's the low-hanging fruit. There are plenty of disengaged families at our parishes, and I think we can run around and spend a lot of energy and emails and flyers and programs and still not reach them. However, I would propose to you that in all of our faith communities are a solid group of Catholic families that are fighting really hard against a difficult culture that could use more of our support and would rejoice the help that we might be able to give them to connect with them. And they will become the best evangelizers of other families once they really have that experience and have that blessing. You might remember a number of years ago, Dynamic Catholic, Matthew Kelly's organization, he did a study of activity in Catholic parishes, and he found that I think it was 6%, maybe it was 7% of the parish does 95% of the donations and the volunteer work and everything else. And he had a really simple idea. He said, the goal isn't to try to get the other 93%. The goal is to get from 7% to 8%. And if you can actually just increase 1 percentage point, like statistically, like all the numbers go crazy, because if this much is being done by 7%, 8% is like, I don't do math, just more. There's just more going on. Okay. Math nerds, you can tell me it's like some number, but it's a really impressive number. Okay. But that's the idea, is I think that we first need to make sure that we connect with the core and the core families that are really engaged and would love some help, would love some faith formation, might love resources that we could offer them. Certainly love it when we can do faith-based things with our kids and their kids. I mean, and that feeling of partnering, that feeling of relationship. I think it's important, particularly those of us in youth ministry, is that we build relationships with parents. That's what helps go against the drop-off mentality, that when I go and, when a kid's playing soccer and invites me to go see a soccer game, I actually know the person I'm going to talk in the stands with are going to be their parents, probably his mom, right? And they're so happy that somebody's there to watch the game. And to think of like, I just need to build relationships all the time. I need to connect with families. I need to talk with them. I need to hear their problems. I need to ask, how can we help? What can be done? Because I find that parishes that end up, the devil wants to divide, right? But if we can get a unity of strong Catholic families, that are praying with each other and for each other, they're going to be the community that's going to evangelize other families. They're going to be the ones that know, the other kid on the soccer team and their parent, and they're going to be able to invite them to something that maybe we do at the parish, or a book study, or just whatever the resource is, that we just want to encourage Catholic families not to just be evangelists to their kids, but to evangelize other families and give them that vision for it. I don't know another way to do it. I mean, I'd say like, that's the first idea, but I can't think of really another idea outside of really building relationships, but trying to do things that might gather families together and help them in their difficult times and empower them to, as St. John Paul II, be who they are. I think that's really at the heart of what needs to be done, in terms of family ministry. And I'd love to hear from other people. What has your experience been in family ministry? What's been successful? Or how maybe there's something that in sharing the church's wisdom on some of this is inspiring you with an idea of how to engage families, engage parents more.
I'll chime in. You mentioned a post-Christian culture. That's a term that I've heard thrown around a lot. I've used it. And I think that's really an important observation, because, and it's important that we're post-Christian, not just not Christian. There are similar elements, but there are challenges to being post-Christian, because what I find with people who were raised Christian, maybe they've fallen away, or maybe they're just not very serious, is they're like, well, yeah, I know Christianity, I know Catholicism, I was raised in that, and here's why I don't agree with it, or whatever. And I'm thinking, no, you actually don't know, but they think they do. Much harder to deal with than an atheist, someone who is completely starved of religion.
Absolutely.
Those people are easy pickings to me. I mean, I had a ton of converts in my youth program and in our parish through just looking at those people as being the ones who are the most hungry and in need. A lot of people, I think, don't realize that. They think those people are more difficult. They're actually much easier. Not to label people and make them targets or something, but we are called to help introduce people to Jesus Christ, and so to put it in simple terms. But so the point I'm making is that the thing we forget is that even though we might see these parents showing up with their kids at Mass, or their kids are coming to the youth program, they oftentimes are a product of that post-Christian culture, and they're just kind of barely hanging on. They have a sense of moral duty, which is wonderful. There's something there that can be built upon, but they've never really been evangelized. The parents might be the first or even the second or third generation of people who are just a sacramental Catholic, basically. Yeah. They grew up just like their kids are growing up. Many in my generation who have kids now are already like that. I went through the sacraments, and most of where I am today is because of things that happened later in life, not because of my catechetical classes. I also would make a big shout out to my mother, who was a saint, and she really was what caused me to have a strong faith. And so I was lucky enough to grow up with that important part. But, I guess if you want to comment on this, I think,
sure.
To me, there's two sides of it. We've got to do everything we can for those youth in our programs who will never have the family life. And we don't know who those will be, but we have to treat them all as though this may be our only shot, is to talk to this kid. But at the same time, and equally hard, we have to work toward family ministry separately and jointly. Because if we only try to reach youth, we will pick off and save, or whatever you want to call it, 1 in 10 or something like that, but we'll lose the rest because all they get is an hour of youth ministry a week. But if we can draw those families into our parish through working as a parish team, and not just youth minister doing his thing, family life doing her thing, if you even have a family life minister, I think if we can really look at it as a big picture, then we can, like you said, not compartmentalize and reach everybody. So feel free to comment.
Yeah, no, those are great. Yeah. And actually right now I wanted to focus on some of the positive elements of family. And then I wanted to kind of conclude, at the end of this time with just some of the, dealing with difficult families. And you're right, helping young people who have no faith family background to be disciples, which is absolutely possible with the power of the Holy Spirit. But going back to that first point, living in a post-Christian culture, I think we're slowly realizing this. I think certain, things that are happening in politics makes us go, oh, a Christian culture would never even think of doing this, and here we are, on the verge of some, very difficult and anti-Christian things, that are going on in our country and our society. Post-Christian is way worse than pre-Christian. And I always used to joke, I'd much rather have a public school kid in ministry than a Catholic school kid in ministry, because there's a sense that almost a Catholic school kid, they feel like they're almost inoculized to the faith. Like they just got just enough to build up the antibodies, and now it just doesn't affect them. And they say things like, "Oh, I know the faith. Oh, yeah, I know it. I know Jesus. Yep. I've studied the Trinity. I get it. Yeah, I know what the church says." And they don't, of course. They have no idea, but they knew enough to pass a class or go through the motions or do whatever. And then sadly, sometimes they're also modeling their families. And there's nothing, I think, more heartbreaking to the heart of God is when a young person learns something about the faith and the parent goes, that's not real. Don't worry about it. We don't do that, and well, what's the young person going to do? Like they're wired to follow their parents. I mean, that's the way it was It was created to be. So being sensitive to this post-Christian world in which many, it's like we have the problem with the post-Christian world is it looks Christian and it just isn't. It's an empty church building. It's like the ruins of something that once was, but no longer is, and even has vestiges of things that are kind of Christian, but it's not, and it's not present. And I don't know if that's a new thought for any of you. I hope it's not, but I would make sure that your faith community, your parish really grapples with this and starts thinking, how can we do ministry to families in a post-Christian world where more and more living the faith is going to be hostile to the culture where we live? I mean, it already is, right? The Equality Act, which is up for, being voted on. It's proposing that it's going to be a hate crime to suggest that somebody shouldn't change genders, go through gender reconstruction surgery, that it's a hate crime to say that you're either a man or a woman and you just have to accept your biological reality of it. That's just absurd. It's one thing to accept and love and embrace somebody who is transgender or same-sex attraction or dealing with these things. But the fact that now it's going to such an extreme of no, and you are forced to say this, or else you're a bigot. And Catholics and Christians are already being portrayed by a society as closed-minded bigots. And you're going to start seeing laws that are going to be against that perceived bigotry. That's the world that's the culture in which we live. I don't mean to be scary. It's just true. But I have good news. The Holy Spirit's worked in more difficult cultures than that. Like Rome was pretty bad. I mean, they were like burning Christians in the streets. And now it's the Roman Catholic Church. So some good things happened in Rome, right? And we can pray for that and pray for our country as well. But we don't want to be naive to it. And we don't want to be naive that the center of the attack is always going to be the family, because that's the best place to evangelize is going to be the place where the enemy is going to be the most active. And we need to be praying for families, supporting families, helping families wake up a bit to the reality, the Kool-Aid they're drinking, the society in which they live. And the best way to do that's going to be through relationship and through witness. How can people see what a family looks like? I started with the Holy Family, just because we need more and more positive examples of what a marriage can be. Marriage is the primordial sacrament, as John Paul II said. It happened before there were sacraments, but like everything else, God elevates these things. What Jesus did on the cross was he elevated, the Jews always broke bread and drank wine at Passover. Jesus elevates that, John the Baptist used to baptize people, and it was a symbolic baptism of repentance. And Jesus elevated that to actually doing it. And in a similar way, when a man and woman come together in the bonds of marriage, it's more than just two people committing themselves to each other. This becomes elevated, and there's an avenue of grace that's present. It's you're not just starting a biological group of people. You're actually establishing a domestic church. And how might we find the charisms of that church? I actually like to think of it not just as a domestic church, but a religious order. Every family is its own religious order, and it has its own rule, and it has its own charisms. Whether or not that's conscious, it's absolutely true. It has its own structure and authority. It has its own vows to different things. And I think sometimes it's a great activity to help a family say, okay, if you're a religious order, like what are the vows? What's the rule of life that you have? What are the charisms of that? And how is that all in light of God? Those bigger picture conversations really do need to happen. And I think it starts with the families that are engaged, with the families that are lost, the families that desire that. Building relationships, not necessarily in like quote unquote family ministry, but every ministry is a family ministry. Every ministry involves somebody who is in a family, and always thinking not just how can youth ministry connect to the family, but really how everything that we're doing, how might that be able to connect to the family? I think that's part of the really big picture of what we want to do and what we're trying to accomplish in ministry with families. Other thoughts or other reflections? I do want to talk about difficult family situations, but I just want to start maybe, with the positive and experiences that you've had in a positive way in dealing with families, or even as I've just been sharing things, thoughts that you have regarding maybe some new or more positive things you can do to reach out to active families, the low-hanging fruit, that might really be receptive. Maybe you've already done that, and share a glory story of how families really just became alive with something that occurred at your parish.
Hi. So I actually am just more of a person that helps out a lot at church. We homeschool our family and have found many fruits in that blessing and building our own domestic church. But as someone who is always involved, we're a military family. So every 3 years we pick up and we jump right in. So we moved to our new parish in July, and my husband and I are leading adult formation. Our 2 confirmed daughters are already helping teach religious ed, and our kids are all altar servers. We lecture. So we know how it is to be like part of that group that just dives in and does stuff. But what we have felt as a family that helps encourage us when parishes do things that really kind of do celebrate the family. And I think it's so easy to do that with the liturgical year, like All Saints Day parties or other types of things that build on the liturgical year, because as a domestic family, that's a really easy way to share our faith and to learn about the saints and to learn those good virtues and to share them with others, because once you've taught them enough, you start to live them. And then you're sharing that just with the whole world. And so I guess as a parent who's kind of on the outside of being in charge of the ministries, to me, that's a great way to get people involved, or even just doing things that seem a little scary for a family to try to do on their own, but to do with other families, like pray the rosary together or the Divine Mercy Chaplet, or find ways to offer opportunities like that might seem a little scary for a family to take on their own, but then it's something that they can build on and continue in their home environment. But such an easy thing to, pray the rosary together, or even just start with a decade, and maybe each week you build on to that, but make it fun with candles, or, so the room is dark as you're praying it and you have candles lit, or it's not a cost for a parish. It's something that's very cheap, but has so much fruit to it. So those are just a couple things, I guess, as a parent, as an outsider, things that I've seen that can really be beautiful and get people involved and wanting to come and to do more, I guess.
Yeah, praise God. That's wonderful. You're right. And I think I think that can be a help for that parishes can provide opportunities for things that a family would have a difficult time doing themselves. Like another example that came to mind as you were sharing praying the rosary was, I know a number of parishes, and my parish did this, would deal with local soup kitchens, and usually around Thanksgiving, but then we always tried to do a Thanksgiving in March as well, would coordinate a schedule of a whole family being able to go and serve food at this, we had this Catholic soup kitchen in downtown that our diocese ran. And it was so powerful for families to do that together, just to spend 2 hours helping make sandwiches. And it was, a lot of the fears that people have about that got taken away. Well, it's all safe. You're going to be with a number of other people. This is a great opportunity, and here's the schedule. A family might think, boy, we'd really love to do something together as a family to serve others. But often that proactivity of, where do I even begin? Like, where do I call? What do I do? How weird would that be if we're the only family that shows up, to do this kinds of things? Some people have that moxie to them. Jen, sounds like you might, just, out of necessity from your military background, you just dive right in, you've got 3 years, you're going to make the best of it. But most other families are like, I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. And so, one idea I think is, what are opportunities that the parish can provide families to do that maybe they'd like to do, but they wouldn't be able to do or coordinate by themselves? What are things, and this goes to your point, Jen, like praying the rosary together. What are things that a family would like to do, but they just feel kind of weird and they've never done it before? And boy, it'd be so helpful if there was a number of other people doing it with them, at least in the beginning, just to take the edge off and to make them feel like, okay, I think we could do this. Okay, this could be something beneficial for us, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And these aren't necessarily programs, but it might just be one night, but a constant thought towards how can we serve families by helping them get involved in some of these things is a wonderful insight. And I think a very important way of ministering to families. Thanks, Jen. Other thoughts or reflections or experiences that you've had, like positive in terms of dealing with, family involvement?
I'll just share a quick tip. And a lot of people who are here today or who will listen later will know this about me because they've experienced it with me. But I am big on let's go to lunch. And for individual ministers, I mean, this is not a parish-wide effort, but I see a lot of people here today are DREs, family life coordinators, youth ministers, and the power of going and just spending time with somebody, having a meal with them, getting to know them, letting them get to know you, share who you are, so that they realize, oh, this is not just a DRE, this is a mom, this is a parent, this is a person, this is and what I have found through doing that is the trust that builds, whether it's at the collegial level with me and you guys, or when I was at a parish with parents, it's my greatest tool I have in my toolbox, was going and just getting to know people and building friendships with them. I'm not your youth minister. I'm your friend who happens to be a youth minister who is happy to help your kid if that's what you want, or help you as a parent. And I tell you guys, I'm not the diocesan person. I'm your friend who's here to work alongside you in ministry. And it works. Case in point, I can identify over 4 years in youth ministry at one parish, Jesus Good Shepherd out in Monroe, at least 12 different people who either came into the faith through our programs and through relationships, or who came back to the faith. Several of them were parents of kids in the program, or kids who came into the faith and then their parent followed them. And I mean, getting baptized, confirmed, you name it. So that convinced me that this works. And I believe that's kind of the Jesus model, is go and meet people's needs, gain trust from them and with them, and eventually they're going to open up to you and you're going to be able to minister.
Yeah. And there's not actually another way. I mean, again, that's, it's building relationships. Like, there's not actually another way to do it, particularly in terms of bringing about conversion in people's lives. There's no book, resource, video, anything. It's always going to be done in the context of relationships. And so the real trick then is trying to figure out, how can we rethink the ministries we're doing to be more relational in nature, particularly as we're ministering to adults? Are we just more conscious of talking with dads about fatherhood, talking with moms about motherhood? A lot of times there's always like a mom's group, at a parish, which is great. There's rarely a dad's group. And, and that doesn't mean, again, I don't think the answer is we just need to have more groups. But sometimes, like I said, the straightest line is not the best. I find this in young adult ministry. The best way to not get young adults to something is usually call it young adult ministry. They're not interested in showing up to a young adult group, but some of the biggest ministries to young adults that are out there are theology of the body. Ooh, that's speaking on an issue that young adults care about. Young Catholic professionals. These are people in the workforce who are trying to retain their Catholic identity and trying to deal with some of the ethical things about that. RCIA, people don't think of it as a young adult ministry, but many times it is. Marriage prep is absolutely a young adult ministry, as can be baptism prep. And if we're not thinking, oh, this is the kind of ministry that we're doing, this is family ministry, again, we'd be tempted to start. The question isn't what new groups can we start to minister to families. The question is, every ministry that we have deals with people in families. how might we be more intentional to build relationships with those families and to provide opportunities for families to grow in faith? And secondarily, how might we listen more in the context of those relationships to families to hear what we could do better to serve families, to connect with them? I know every parish I know, when they have that conversation and they finally get some good relationships with families, and they ask the question, so what could the church do to serve you better? It seems like the number one suggestion I hear over and over again: babysitting. Provide babysitting at every freaking thing you do as a parish. Just always provide babysitting. The parish mission, babysitting. The parents want to come. They have a 5-year-old. They can't come, or one of them comes and the other one stays at home, and now they're not getting it together, right? Just be thoughtful of some of those younger families who would love to get out and think the idea of doing something at the parish is cool. Again, we don't even reach the problem is we don't even reach the low-hanging fruit sometimes. And how are we going to possibly reach people farther out if we're not able to engage the ones that would love to come, but they've just got some obstacles? And we could simply address some of those obstacles. If we just find creative ways of thinking through how might a parent come to this night, or what can we do to connect with them? Zoom and internet things have been really exciting in that level. Even many of you are watching this as a recording. You're watching it a little bit later. And again, things in our parish that are building relationship. How can we do more of that and just say, is this really a family-friendly ministry? Again, not just youth ministry, every single ministry. Is this a family-friendly youth ministry? Are we doing the right things? Who would be here but couldn't be here, and why aren't they here? If we can start there, I think you'd see an immediate growth, of a faith life, of a community. If we could just kind of unleash the families that would like to be more involved but have whatever obstacles to not be involved, then I think you really start seeing a ministry where if other families are involved, then other families join, because they want to see other people there. They want to find a way to connect and to be a part of those things. And I know one parish that just decided to offer babysitting, and they just had they just started off by saying 2 hours of free babysitting. Like nothing else is going on. We just, we want to encourage families here. And I know many of you have younger kids, if that's the dynamic of your parish. Many of you have younger kids and it's tough to get out for a night. And we want you to. We really think it's important. So we're just going to offer 2 hours of babysitting. And the response was, thank you. Like, gosh, that's so you kind of always like, and then what do you want from it, church? It's like, we just want to do this for you. I think the youth group really was involved, with that. And then they started saying, hey, we're going to offer you 2 hours of free babysitting. But just so you know, the second hour of that is going to be a holy hour. And maybe before you pick up your kid, stop by. And they saw a big growth, like maybe not the full hour, but like 45 minutes, half hour, parents would come and they would be there. What a great ministry that is. I think we can think of a lot of those ideas. I know a guy that was doing a lot of service projects with young people. And then he had this idea, what if I bring parents on the service project? And, it was more affluent parish, so they used to fly to different places. And so he did a normal trip, but then he also said, hey, I want to do a trip where you can bring your parents with you. Now, what he found is not many he said he had about 9 parents show up out of like 20 kids, which he thought was pretty good, for a percentage. He said it was remarkable. Like a lot of dads came because it was building a house. And many of them said, you know what? I haven't spent a week with my kid since I can't remember when. And just doing something with a parent, working together was just absolutely life-changing. Sometimes we would, I get sometimes that we want to make sure that we have an opportunity for a young person to be themselves. And sometimes they do need to be independent and not have their parent over their shoulder. But then I think sometimes we can take that way too far. And there's other things that if a parent was there, it would actually just be that much better, because we want to be intentional about connecting them back in their family and providing those experiences. That's where the faith blossoms and grows. That's where there's a sense of gratitude towards the church. Wow, you really did something great for my family. And that just brings even more involvement and more families and more parents and more people, who are connected with them. Now, I do want to address the bigger, so go for low-hanging fruit, build the positive relationships. The stats don't look very good about active Catholic families, but the ones who show up at church on a regular basis, and certainly the kids that are involved in our programs, you can be optimistic that they're probably on the high end of living the faith and wanting to do things. And those are the ones to build relationships with, listen, and kind of grow from that core. If we can't service the ones who are engaged and want more, there's no reason to be reaching out to people who couldn't care less about anything that we're doing. So that's the main part of what I wanted to say. But I'd be remiss to not address the reality of our situation, particularly those of us that are involved in faith formation, and particularly sacramental formation. That's when all the kids show up. And the extra kids that show up are usually the ones from disengaged families. And that likely means they're disengaged kids. And how can we deal with those families? How can we, better serve them? I would say that when I shared this a little bit in the beginning, when I started off in ministry, I wasn't very proactive in reaching out to engaged families. I didn't do a lot in the ministry that would let them see what was going on, that would let them be a part of what was happening. Sadly, I had kind of the babysitter mentality of, I'll take your kid, drop him off, and I'll give him back to you a little bit more cleaned up and holy than when you dropped him off. And I was young, whatever. And I think the church and her wisdom and society and lots of other things have made us realize, oh man, I regret those times. I just think back like, oh Lord, what an idiot I was. What was I doing? And now what we can see though is when you don't deal with the engaged families, the phone that rings is the disengaged parent, because they're upset at some requirement or they're upset at something that happened. And you can very easily, and again, I fell into this my first few years of ministry, start thinking that passing on the faith is a battle against parents, not with parents. Because if you don't reach out for those that are positively engaged, you'll hear the complainers. And you can immediately build up a real negativity and anger even towards parents who are just dropping their kids off, who, seem to fuss at every single requirement, that you put on any kind of sacramental prep. And I know people in ministry that have been wounded and hurt by parents and families, and they have a bit of an aggressive mentality. If that's you, ask the Holy Spirit to heal your heart. Because it was me at one point, and it's not good. I mean, fruit doesn't come from it. Even though you're going to deal with families that are opposed to the gospel and opposed to the faith, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You really want to have God's heart in this situation. You want to be able to teach what the church teaches, and love as the church loves. But dealing with those families, dealing with those parents, I mean, it's a frustrating and challenging thing. What I found that helped the most in my own personal experience, and I'm happy to hear other experiences of, those of you that are on this call of a vast array of experiences. But it actually was in building up a strong core of supportive families. I wasn't just the lone person who worked at the parish that had no clue what was going on with families. I was able to have other families, other parents, all of whom pretty much know each other, that could help, run some interference, that would even say, I'll talk to her, or I know that person. Oh yeah, you have, and get some of the understanding, but at least feel like a level of support, a level of connection, and ideally a positive relationship. When a frustrated parent calls you, because you're requiring this or requiring that. They've got no relationship with you. And sadly, you're not even a person to them. You're just that representative of the church, who's not letting their son play in a basketball game or whatever the case may be. But as we're building more positive relationships, as we're doing more things, as the fruit of that becomes apparent, it doesn't go away, but I think it makes it a bit more palatable. And as the church is really trying to have the attitude of serving parents in holiness, that doesn't mean that we need to then go the other extreme. And I've seen some people do this, which is to say, well, whatever the parents say is right. However the parent passes on the faith is right. No, that's not right. Sometimes we have to say, yeah, your parent isn't, their kids will say, well, this is what my parent says. And you always have to have that very sensitive moment of like, okay, I had it. I don't want to waste too much time, but one of my most eye-opening experiences was when I first started doing ministry, and I gave a chastity talk, and somebody gave me good advice. They said, whenever you're talking about sexuality, record your talk, because there's a good chance the kid's going to go home and mess it up, and the family's going to be like, what are you talking about? Well, that's exactly what happened. So I gave the talk. I thought it went pretty well, but then I get a call 2 days later from one of the kids' parents. And he said, hey, I wanted to talk to you about your talk. He said, my son came home saying you said some stuff. And he said, I don't want to say what he said because it's a little bit, it sounds crazy to me, but I just want to give you a chance to say for yourself what you were trying to communicate to my child. I said, well, first of all, thank you for calling me. I really, really appreciate that. And I said, I actually have it on videotape. If you'd like to see the exact talk I gave. And he said, no, that's okay. And he said, and he was just like 3 blocks down from where the parish was. That's where he, had an office. And he's like, actually, do you have a moment? Just come on over. We can talk face to face. I'm sure we can clear this up really quick. I was like, great. So again, I met with him really friendly. I said, hey, again, thank you for the chance to do that. And I just recapped what I said, how God gave us the gift of sex. It's a sacramental gift. We are made to be with one person for our whole lives. The beauty of chastity, saying, chastity isn't a no, it's a yes, all these things. And he's just staring at me as I'm talking. And I said, so anyway, that's what I was trying to communicate. And he looked at me and he said, that's exactly what he said. You said, I just can't believe anybody in their right mind would tell a teenager not to have sex. And I was like, what? And I was like, oh, I misread the room really badly, and he just looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, I tell my kids, like before you get married, this is the opportunity to have sex with many people. I'm like, okay, well, what do I do in that situation? Well, I said, I tried to talk to him about it, but he just was totally not interested. And he just thought I was a crazy person. Well, now I'm dealing with that teenager, and they're hearing one thing from a youth minister and they're hearing another thing from their dad. Right. And how do you handle that with love and with truth and say, look, like this is what, Christ teaches something very different, and this is the challenge of faith. And you get in those the moments. Even, Jesus said sometimes the message of the gospel turns families against each other, if they're not living faith, but we still have to proclaim it. They still need to hear it. And we can believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. Yes, it's more likely than not that a young person will reflect the religious life of their family. But that doesn't mean that they're condemned to that fate if their family is not religious. By building relationships, by loving, by showing a new way of living, that can bring about great transformation in people's hearts and in people's lives. Conversion is possible for everybody, anywhere, anytime. And we want to make sure we have hope in that as we minister to families. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of what we could be talking about because it's so important. But I hope some of those ideas, some of that vision of the church, some of those practicals might be helpful in your own ministry. And I'd love to hear any other questions or thoughts. I know, Mark, I think you said somebody emailed a number of questions or things that we could probably address on a topic such as this.
I'm not sure if I just commented. I don't know if I came.
Wait, you just muted.
Okay, I cannot look at it and be on here at the same time. I think we addressed a lot of it. And I think you covered a lot of things that would answer her questions. She was talking about lukewarm and how do we get people to do more than just clock in and out of Mass. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the problem is that they don't have a relationship with probably God or anyone in that parish. And so, like you said, relationships are key. And she also said something about sometimes it seems like maybe you have one spouse that or parent that is very, more passionate, really the fire behind everything. And the other is just kind of along for the ride. Maybe you'd want to comment on that.
Well, yeah, that happens a bit. And I mean, and sometimes it's even, what they call a mixed marriage. You'll get a spouse that one of them's Catholic and the other one isn't Catholic. And so, though they might have agreed to raise the kids Catholic, they're not going to lift a finger to help. I think sometimes those are bigger pictures, bigger images than bigger issues rather than things we might be able to immediately deal with. I just like to deal with the person in front of me. And okay, well, how can I help that probably sadly woman? How can I help that mother in terms of fostering a life of faith when the kids are going to go home and they might see very contrary things to faith? Sometimes it's just help, prayer groups, talking with them, asking them what they need. Again, the context of relationship, you just can't skip it. We want a silver bullet here. But there's no silver bullet. We want a really great program. That seems to be the Catholic Church's way of approaching things. We'll come up with a great program, a great video series. It doesn't work. This only works through relationships. And we're not very good at relationships, I think, as a Catholic Church. And because of that, I think we're not very good at ministering to families, because that's the very means by which we want to try to connect to parents and to kids. So I would say the more that we can rethink everything we're doing to be more family friendly, to engage kids, to do babysitting, to allow adults to do things, just to serve the family, that our parish. I love how in Catholic parishes, maybe we'll close with this as we're running out of time. If you've ever dealt with any Protestant denomination, you ask how many people go here and they have an exact count, 537, 248, 1023. You go to a Catholic parish and they'll tell you how many families are a part of that parish. Now, even though many of those families aren't active, I think it's beautiful that we would think of our parishes in terms of not individuals, but in terms of families. And I think if we could take that attitude and just evaluate everything we're doing, and how does that help and bless and reach out to families, even the way we celebrate liturgy, I think as we find answers to those questions and as we do little things, we'll start seeing really good fruit, first of all, from those that are hungering for it. And then they'll be the agents of change for the lukewarm, the ones that are kind of there, but not, things that they can be drawn into from other moms, other dads, other families that are present there. Thank you all for this fun conversation. And again, you can't get enough of it, but God bless the work you're doing, the ministry you're doing. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing, one more little practical thing I had on my notes to say. Particularly we like with youth ministry, for example. I think it's really important anytime you do a major event with young people to have something the next weekend that parents are invited to. Have a barbecue, have, something. You guys have usually nice weather. You can always do a barbecue, right? But have it be an opportunity for young people on that weekend to stand up and give witness to what happened to them. I try to do that at all the masses, to be honest. Like anytime I do a student conference or I do a youth retreat, I'll try to find a guy and a girl, and usually number them, ideally, God willing, there's a number of them that had a positive experience. And I have them just share briefly at the end of every mass, because you want to have the whole parish be like, wow, young people are getting holy. That's amazing. But then have the greatest hits of that at a barbecue. And at the end, really have a barbecue that celebrates the weekend you had. And it's directed to parents. Hey, parents, we just want to share some of what we talked about, but we're going to have the kids share it. Try to have some of the kids recap the talks and the messages. Again, parents show up to things their kids do. They don't need to hear me. They don't need to hear you. Have the kids give a witness to share the faith. A kid actually might, oddly enough, feel more comfortable giving their testimony in front of their peers that were on the weekend with them than sitting at home. Mom and Dad, can you sit down? I just want to spend 10 minutes and tell you how God changed my life this weekend. Just things like that. Like, again, just another practical suggestion of, I want them to have a great experience on the retreat, but I want them to take it home. So don't just think the retreat is over on Sunday. What can I now do to help that experience connect with their families? If we just keep asking those questions, I think new ideas come forward that will bring about great fruit. Amen.